Hey everybody, this is a re-recorded tutorial from the one that we missed on the first day of class, and this is part one of an introduction to Cinema 4D. So let's get started right away. The first thing we want to do is to put a model in here so we can start talking about how to use three-dimensional space in Cinema 4D. So if you click up here where it says these are the primitive objects, if you click and hold it down, you can see that there are many different primitives to use. We're going to start today with just a cube. We're going to drop that in, and I'm actually going to click this button here, which allows us to see a move view. Anyway, what we see right away is we get a cube that's dropped into what we call our viewport, which is this whole entire area right here. And we can see right away that we have these arrows, green, red, blue. This represents the y-axis, up and down. This is the x-axis, left and right, and this is the z-axis, front and back. We also see these little yellow tabs here that actually allow us to manipulate the object. So we could, grab and stretch along the z and maybe shrink along the y to change the proportion of our cube. The cube is also appears active right now because we see the arrows and the highlighted areas around it. It's also active in the object manager, which is right here on the right side. Here you can see it's labeled cube. If we were to drop another one in, you would see it's cube 0.1. The default for the primitive object is shown below in the attributes manager, and we can see the size here, 200 by 200 by 200. Here you can also manipulate this manually. So if I made this, let's say 400 instead, along the y, it would grow in length in that direction. So you can manipulate it using the handlebars I talked about here. You can also manipulate it in the attributes manager here to change the scale. Above, you notice in the objects manager that now the new cube that we brought in is highlighted, and that is active. The other one is not. If we move this guy out of the way, you can see this one is. Let's move it actually back here. There you can see this one is not active, the one behind it is. And if you click back and forth between them, you can see that one becomes active and then the other one becomes active. If you don't like an object in the scene, you can just simply select it in the objects manager and delete it. Click on the other cube and that becomes active again. So we can change. You can organize and you can add and delete objects using the objects manager. The other things that we have to sort of help us out with the modeling in the scene are different viewports. So up here we have 4 different icons that on the top right of our viewport. The one to the very right, if you click that, allows you to see all 4 viewports at once. And here you can see the top view, the right view, and then of course the front view, all different shapes because of that. We've made that into a different type of object. Change the proportion of that object. If it was a cube, it would all look the same. So anyway, that allows us to see different angles. We can line things up. We can change proportions based on those different side views and top views. If we click back, if we want to see back into perspective, we just click on the one that we want on that viewport icon, and it allows us to go back to that large scale. The next button to the left is a rotate view, and if you click and hold that down and then you move your mouse back and forth, you can spin around, you can go up and down, underneath, you can see different views of that object. So that's a really helpful tool when you're modeling. We can also, the next one to the left is the zoom view, so you can zoom in and out of the object, and notice that it's zooming in the center of that object, so we're zooming into the middle of it. And then finally the move view, so we can sort of move the object along that view to get us into proportion that we need. So those icons really help to visualize as you're moving around the object and to manipulate it. If you actually want to move the object, there's a move tool. If you hold the mouse above, you can see the labels. There's a scale tool, and then there's a rotate tool, and these are helpful for actually moving and manipulating things around. So when the move tool is selected, we see the arrows, and we can grab and click an arrow and we can move the object. Also notice below down here that as I'm moving along the Y, it's also changing the position here. You can always do this manually as well. If you wanted to make that exactly 100 centimeters, you could click and move it up 100 centimeters, or bring it back down to 0. So you can change things manually, and then of course using the handlebars. There's also these little icons in between that show up, these little stealth bombers, if you will. If you grab this one, you see that the Z and the Y are highlighted, and if you click and hold it, you can move along only the Z and the Y. So you're not moving along the X at all, but you're moving along the Z and the Y. So that helps sometimes too when you're moving things around. If you move it to a position you don't like, you can always Command Z, and that will bring it back to where you had it. The scale tool allows you to scale, and because this is a fixed object right now, we haven't made it editable, which allows us to manipulate it a little bit further. When you scale, it's going to scale it proportionally, so it's not going to change, the overall. You're not going to be able to shrink like you are with using those handlebars here. So that allows you to scale it up. And then there's the rotate tool, which will give you this globe icon, and then you can grab any one of those. So like along the Y, if I want to spin it along the Y, I can grab this one and change it. And you can see the angle of the position there, and you can also see it under rotation down below. If I wanted to make this negative 90 degrees, just click that, and you can see it's spinning it accordingly. So you can, any of these things you can move around to twist and turn your model, which can become really helpful. The last thing I guess I wanted to talk about is just going back to this move tool and clicking on the object here. One thing I forgot to mention about in the objects and the attributes manager was allowing the edges to be a little bit different surface. So we have a few more buttons down here. Separate surfaces actually splits apart all the polygons. This fillet or fillet, I guess I'll say fillet, changes the edges here. So if we zoom in a little bit here, you can see that the edges have been quite manipulated. This is the radius, and if we change the radius to less, let's say 10, you can see that it gives us that curved kind of corner. And if we move this, the subdivisions, the more subdivisions, the more rounded it is. So if we, less subdivisions, more geometric. So if you wanted to have that sort of geometric look, you could have less subdivisions, and you can change the radius accordingly to how you like it. And that gives you some manipulation of the model. It allows you to control its placement. You can add and subtract models in the Objects Manager, and you can change things in the Attributes Manager. So that's all for part 1. We'll move on to part 2 next.